We're going to continue reading from the Chaldean account of Genesis. We are on chapter 5, page 60. Babylonian legend of the creation. Mutilated condition of tablets. List of subjects. Description of chaos. Tiamat. Generation of gods. Damascus. Comparison with Genesis. Three great gods. Doubtful fragments. Fifth tablet. Stars, planets, moon, sun. Abyss or chaos. Creation of moon. Creation of animals. Man, his duties. Dragon of sea. Fall. Curse for disobedience. Discussion. Sacred tree. Dragon or serpent. War with Tiamat. Weapons. Merodach. Destruction of Tiamat. Mutilation of documents. Parallel biblical account. Age of story is what chapter 5 is about. And it says, I have related in the first chapter the history of the discovery of this legend. The tablets composing it are in mutilated condition and too fragmentary to enable a single tablet to be completed, or to give more than a general view of the whole subject. The story so far, as I can judge from the fragments, agrees generally with the account of the creation in the book of Genesis, but shows traces of having originally included very much more matter. The fragments of the story, which I have arranged, are as follows. Number 1 says, part of the first tablet giving an account of the chaos and the generation of the gods. Number 2 says, fragments of subsequent tablet, perhaps the second on the foundation of the deep. Then it says, for number 3, fragments of tablet placed here with great doubt, probably referring to the creation of land. Number 4, part of the fifth tablet, giving the creation of the heavenly bodies. Fragment of the seventh tablet, giving the creation of land animals. Fragment of 3 tablets on the creation of and fall of man. Fragments of tablets relating to the war between the gods and evil spirits. These fragments indicate that the series included at least 12 tablets, the writing on each tablet being in one column on the front and back, and probably including over 100 lines of text. The first fragment in the story is the upper part of the first tablet, giving the description of the void or chaos and part of the generation of the gods. The translation is, when above were not raised the heavens, and below on the earth a plant had not grown up, the abyss also had not broken up their boundaries. The chaos, and then in parentheses it says, or water, and then it says Tiamat, and then in parentheses it says the sea, was the producing mother of the whole of them. Those waters at the beginning were ordained, but a tree had not grown, a flower had not unfolded. When the gods had sprung up, any one of them, a plant had not grown, and order did not exist. Where or were made also the great gods, the gods Lamu and Lahamu, they caused to come, and they grew. The gods Sar and Kesar were made. A course of days and a long time passed. The god Anu, the god Sar, and what it says like ... that I'm assuming that's the part of the tablet that's been mutilated that they couldn't translate. On the reverse of this tablet, there are only fragments of the 8 lines of colophon, but the restoration of the passage is easy. It reads, first tablet of when above, and in parentheses it says name of creation series, palace of Ashurbanipal, king of nations, king of Assyria, to whom Nebu and Tasmit attentive ears have given. He sought with diligent eyes the wisdom of the inscribed tablets, which among the kings who went before me, none those writings had sought, the wisdom of Nebu, the impressions of the god Yinstructor, all delightful. On the tablets I wrote, I studied, I observed, and for the inspection of my people within my palace I placed. The colophon will serve to show the value attached to the documents and the date of the present copies. The fragments of the obverse, broken as it is precious, as giving the description of the chaos or desolate void before the creation of the world and the first movement of creation. This corresponds to the first two verses of the chapter of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth the earth and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. On comparing the fragment of the first tablet of the creation with the extract from Damascus, the extract from Damascus, we do not find any statements as to there being two principles at first called Toth or Teuth and Apison, and these producing Moimis, but in the creation tablet the first existence is called Mumu Tiamatu, a name meaning the sea water or sea chaos. The name Mumu or Mumu Tiamatu combines the two names Moimis and Teoth of Damascus. Tiamatu appears also as Tisalat or Tisalat and agrees with the Talath of Berosus, which we are expressly told was the sea. It is evident that, according to the notion of the Babylonians, the sea was the origin of all things, and this also agrees with the statement of Genesis 2, where it says, or where the chaotic waters are called the deep. The same word as the Tiamat of the creation text and the Teoth of Damascus. The Assyrian word mumu is probably connected with the Hebrew word confusion, and one of its equivalents is uman, equal to the Hebrew noise or tumult. Besides the name of the chaotic deep called, and that was, I believe, confusion. No, that wasn't confusion. Sorry, they got some Hebrew words in here. I don't actually know how to pronounce them in Hebrew, but if you're watching the screen, you can see them right there. So we got a Hebrew word in Genesis, which is, as I have said, evidently the Tiamat of the creation text. We have in Genesis the word, there's another Hebrew word, waste, desolate, or formless, applied to this chaos. This appears to be the Tehuta of the Assyrians, a name of the seawater. And in parentheses it says, History of Ashurbanipal, page 59. This word is closely connected with the word Tiamat, or Tamtu, the sea. The correspondence between the inscription and Genesis is here complete, both stating that a watery chaos preceded the creation and formed, in fact, the origin and groundwork of the universe. We have here not only an agreement in sense, but what is rarer, the same word used in both narratives as the name of this chaos and given also in the account of Damascus. Berosus had certainly the slightly different form, Talith, with the same sense, however, and it might be suspected that this word was a corruption of Tiamat, but the Babylonian word is read Tiamtu. Tiamat and Tisalet, which last is more probably the origin of the word Talith of Berosus. Next, we have in the inscription the creation of the gods Lama and Lamu and Lahama or Lahamu. These are male and female personifications of motion and production and correspond to the Dashi. I think that's how you pronounce that. There's a lot of words I'm not familiar with and bizarre names in here, so I'm trying my best here. So the Dashi, Dashus or Dacus of Damascus, and the moving, another Hebrew word, which I believe is wind or spirit of Genesis. The next stage in the inscription gives the production of Sar or Isar or Ilsar. I can't tell if that's two I's or an I and an L. Ilsar and Kisar, representing the upper expanse and the lower expanse, and corresponding to the Asaurus and Kisari of Damascus. The resemblance in these names is probably closer than here represented, for Sar and Isar is generally read Asur as a deity in later times, being the ordinary sign for the supreme god of the Assyrians. Here in the cuneiform text becomes so mutilated that little can be made out of them, but it appears from the fragment of line 14 that the next step was, as in Damascus, the generation of the three great gods Anu, Elu, and Hia. The Anus Ilinus and Anus of the rider. Or sorry, the Anus Ilinus and Eos, I think that's how I pronounce that, of the rider. Anu represents the heaven. Elu represents the earth. Ea is the sea. And I believe that's Enki, if I'm not mistaken. Enki was also referred to as Ea. And I think the H is silent now that I'm... If my memory serves me correctly, the H, I believe, might be silent. In this new form of the universe, it is probably that the inscription went on to relate the generation of the other gods and then passed to the successive acts of creation by which the world was fashioned. The successive forms Lama and Lahama, Sar and Kisar are represented in some of the gods listed, in some of the god lists as names or manifestations of Anu and Anatu. In each case, there appears to be a male and female principle, which principles combine in the formation of the universe. The resemblance between the extract from Damascus and the account in the creation tablet as to these successive stages in forms in the creation is striking and leaves no doubt that there was a connection between the two. The next three tablets in the creation series are absent, there being only two doubtful fragments of this part of the story. Judging from the analogy of the book of Genesis, we may conjecture that this part of the narrative contained the description of the creation of light, of the atmosphere or firmament, of the dry land, and the plants. One fragment to which I have alluded is probably belonging to this space is a small portion of the top of the tablet referring to the fixing of the dry land, but it may belong to the later part of the story, for it is part of a speech to one of the gods. The fragment is, "When the foundations of the ground of rock thou didst make, the foundation of the ground thou didst call, thou didst beautify the heaven to the face of the heaven, thou didst give." There is a second more doubtful fragment which appears to belong to this space and like the last, seems to relate part of the creation of the dry land. I give it here under reserve. The god Sar, ... Pan, ... When to the god, ... Certainly I will cover, ... From the day that thou, ... Okay, angry thou did speak, Sar, or Assur, his mouth opened and spake to the god, above the sea which is the seat of, in front of the Asara, in parentheses, asked question, is that the firmament, which I haven't made? Below the place I strengthen it, let there be made also Elu, and then in parentheses, asked question, is Elu earth, for the dwelling of man, ? Within it, his city may he build, and when from the sea he raised this the place lifted up, above the heaven the place lifted up, Palbiki, the temples of the great gods, his father and his of him the god, 3 and over all which thy hand made, 3 having over the earth which thy hand has made, having Palbiki, if that's even how you pronounce that, which thou hast called its name. And then the question marks, made. My hand forever may they carry the place. Any one the work with, he rejoiced to after the gods which in he opened. This fragment is both mutilated and obscure. In the 8th line, I have translated firmament with a query, the sound and meaning of the word being doubtful, and in line 10, I translate earth from from a combination of 2 characters more obscure still, my translation being a conjecture grounded on some meaning or meanings of the individual monograms. Palbiki are the characters of one name of the city of Assur, but I do not understand the introduction of this name here. The next recognizable portion of the creation legends is the upper part of the 5th tablet, which gives the creation of the heavenly bodies and runs parallel to the account of the 4th day of creation in Genesis. This tablet opens as follows. 5th tablet of creation legend, obverse. It was delightful, all that was fixed by the great gods. Stars, their appearance, in figures of animals he arranged, to fix the year through the observation of their constellations. 12 months, or signs of stars in 3 rows he arranged, from the day when the year commences unto the close. He marked the positions of the wandering stars, in parentheses it says planets, to shine in their courses, that they may not do injury and may not trouble anyone. The positions of the gods Bel and Ea he fixed with them, or with him. And he opened the great gates in the darkness shrouded. The fastenings were strong on the left and right. In its mass, in parentheses it says the lower chaos, he made a boiling. The god Uru, and then in parentheses it says the moon, he caused to rise out the night he overshadowed, to fix it also for the light of the night until the shining of the day, that the month might not be broken, and in its amount be regular. At the beginning of the month, at the rising of night, his horns are breaking through to shine on the heaven. On the 7th day, to a circle, he begins to swell and stretches towards the dawn further, when the god Shamash, which is the sun, in the horizon of heaven in the east. Then it says, formed beautifully and this is the part of the tablet where it's mutilated, so there's a bunch of missing words here. To the orbit Shamash was perfected. The dawn Shamash should change, going on its path. More mutilated tablets, missing words, giving judgment to tame a second time, reverse, missing mutilated tablet, and then it says he fixed. Of the gods on his hearing, fifth tablet of when above creation series, in parentheses. Country of Ashurbanipal, king of nations, king of Assyria. This fine fragment is a typical specimen of the style of the series and shows marked stage in the creation, the appointment of the heavenly roll, or the heavenly orbs. It parallels the fourth day of creation in the first chapter of Genesis, where we read, "And God said, let there be light in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day and the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days and years, and let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens," in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And God said, and God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. The fragment of the first tablet of the creation series showed that was rather introductory and dealt with the generation of the gods more than the creation of the universe. And the fact that the fifth tablet contains the creation given in Genesis under the fourth day, while subsequent tablet, probably the seventh, gives the creation of the animals, which according to Genesis took place on the sixth day, leads to the inference that the events of each of the days of Genesis were recorded on that separate tablet, and that the numbers of the tablets generally followed in the same order as the days of creation in Genesis. Thus, Genesis chapter 1. 1 and 2 agree with tablet 1, verse 3 to 5, first day, probably with tablet 2, verse 6 to 8, second day, probably with tablet 3, 9 and 13, third day, probably agree with tablet 4, 14 and 19, the fourth day, agree with tablet 5, and so on and so on. Okay, it goes down here, 20, 24 and 25, the 6th, the 7th, 26, and following the 6th and 7th day, probably with tablet 8. The tablet, which I think to be 8th, appears to give the creation and fall of man, and is followed by several other tablets giving apparently the war between the gods and the powers of evil, but all of these are very mutilated, and no number can be positively proved beyond the fifth tablet. There is, however, fair reason to suppose that there was a close agreement in subjects and order between the text of the Chaldean legend and Genesis, while there does not appear to be anything like the same agreement between these inscriptions and the accounts transmitted to us through Berosus, see page 37 through 50. The fifth tablet commences with the statement that the previous creations were, quote-unquote, delightful or satisfactory, agreeing with the oft-repeated statement of Genesis after each act of creative power that God saw that it was good. The only difference here is one of detail. It appears that the Chaldean record contains the review and expression of satisfaction at the head of each tablet, while the Hebrew has it at the close of each act. We then come to the creation of the heavenly orbs, which are described in the inscription as arranged like animals, while the Bible says they were set as lights in the firmament of heaven, and just as the book of Genesis says, they were set for signs and seasons, for days and years. So the inscription describes that the stars were set in course to point out the year. The 12 constellations are signs of the zodiac, and the two other bands of constellations are mentioned just as two set of 12 stars each are mentioned by the Greeks, one north and one south of the zodiac. I have translated one of these names, Nibir, which means wandering stars. Hang on, let me zoom back in really quick. Okay, Nibir, wandering stars, or quote-unquote planets, but this is not the usual word for planet, and there is a star called Nibir near the place where the sun crossed the boundary between the old and new years, and this star was one of the 12 supposed to be favorable to Babylonia. It is evident from the opening of the inscription on the first tablet of the Chaldean astrology and astronomy that the functions of the stars were, according to the Babylonians, to act not only as regulators of the seasons and the year, but to be also used as signs, as in Genesis 1:14. For in those ages it was generally believed that the heavenly bodies gave, by their appearances and positions, signs of events which were coming on the earth. The passage given in the 8th line of the inscription, to the effect that the God who created the stars fixed places or habitations for Bel and Ea with himself in the heavens, points to the fact that Anu, God of the heavens, was considered to be the creator of the heavenly hosts, for it is he who shares with Bel and Ea the divisions of the face of the sky. The 9th line of the tablet opens a curious view as to the philosophical beliefs of the early Babylonians. They evidently considered that the world was drawn together out of the waters and rested or reposed upon the vast abyss of chaotic ocean which filled the space below the world. This dark infernal lake was shut in by gigantic gates and strong fastenings, which prevented the floods from overwhelming the world. It sounds kind of like the whole ice wall theory, with supposed there's like some gates that you can go through that take you to the other continents outside of the ice wall, according to the whole flat earth stuff on the ice wall theory. When the deity decided to create the moon, he is represented as drawing aside the gates of this abyss and creating whirling motions like boiling in the dark ocean below. Then, at his bidding, from this turmoil arose the moon like a giant bubble, and passing through the open gates, mounted on its destined way across the vaults of heaven. The Babylonian account continues with the regulation of the motions of the moon to overshadow the night, to regulate and give light until the dawn of day. The phases of the moon are described. It's commencing as a thin crescent at the evening on the first day of the month, and is gradually increasing and traveling further into the night. After the moon, the creation of the sun is recorded. Its beauty and perfection are extolled, and the regulatory of its orbit, which led to its being considered the type of a judge and the regulator of the world. The Babylonian account of the creation gives the creation of the moon before that of the sun in reverse order to that in Genesis. And evidently, the Babylonians considered the moon the principal body, while the book of Genesis makes the sun the greater light. Here it is evident that Genesis is truer to nature than the Chaldean text. The details of the creation of the planets and the stars, which would have been very important to us, are unfortunately lost. No further fragment of this tablet having been recovered. The colophon at the close of tablet 5 gives us, however, part of the first line of the 6th tablet, but not enough to determine its subject. It is probable that this dealt with the creation of creatures of the water and fowls in the air, and that these were the creation of Bel, the companion deity to Anu. The next tablet, the seventh in the series, is probably represented by a curious fragment, which I first found in one of the trenches at Koyunjik, and recognized at once as a part of the description of creation. This fragment is like some of the others. The upper portion of the tablet, much broken and only valuable from its generally clear meaning. The translation of the fragment is, when the gods in their assembly had created, were delightful, the strong monsters, they caused to be living creatures, cattle of the field, beasts of the field, and creeping things of the field. They fixed for the living creatures, cattle and creeping things of the city they fixed. The assembly of the creeping things, the whole which were created, which in the assembly of my family, and the god Ninsiku, in parentheses it says the Lord of noble face, caused to be two. The assembly of the creeping things he caused to go. Flesh beautiful, pure presence, pure presence, pure presence in the assembly. This tablet corresponds to the sixth day of creation. And it's referring to Genesis 1:24 through 25. And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping things, and beast of the earth after his kind, and it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and God saw that it was good. The Assyrian tablet commences with a statement of the satisfaction a former creation, apparently that of the monsters or whales had given, here referring to Genesis 1:23. It then goes on to relate the creating of living animals on land, three kinds being distinguished, exactly agreeing with the Genesis account. And then we have in the 9th line a curious but broken account of Ninsiku, in parentheses says one of the names of Ea, creating two beings to be with the animals. The wording of the next fragmentary line leading to the suspicion that this was the opening of the account of the creation of man. This, however, is only suspicion, for the lines are so mutilated and obscure that nothing can be fairly proved from them. It is curious here, however, to notice a tablet which refers to the creation of man. In this tablet, K63, the creation of the human race is given to Ea, and all references in other inscriptions make this his work. In considering the next fragments, those which really relate to man, there is great difficulty, for in the first fragment to be noticed, on one side, the mutilation of the tablet renders the sense totally uncertain. In the space lost there may be a string of negatives which would entirely reverse the meaning. It is probable that the other side of the fragment is a discourse to the first woman on her duties. I think I think it to be the reverse of the tablet, which, so far as it can be translated, appears to give the speech of the deity to the newly created pair, man and woman, instructing them in their duties. And so now it's the next tablet is K3364, obverse. In parentheses, it says, many lines lost. Evil, which is eaten by the stomach, ingrowing, consumed, extended, heavy, firmly thou shalt speak, and the support of mankind, thee, every day thy God thou shalt approach or invoke, sacrifice, prayer of the mouth and instruments, to thy God in reverence thou shalt carry. Whatever shall be suitable for divinity, supplication, humility, and bowing of the face, fire, thou shalt give to him, and thou shalt bring tribute. And in the fear also of God shalt thou shalt be holy, in thy knowledge, and afterwards in the tablets. Worship and goodness shall be raised, sacrifice, saying, and worship. The fear of God shalt not leave, the fear of the angels shalt live in. With friend and enemy speech thou shalt make, under speech thou shalt make good. When thou shalt speak, also he will give. When thou shalt trust, also thou to enemy also, thou shalt trust a friend, thy knowledge also. And then it says reverse, many lines lost. Beautiful place also, divide in beauty and thy hand, and thou to presence thou shalt fix, and not thy sentence, thee to the end. In the presence of beauty, and thou shalt speak of thy beauty, and beautiful, and to give drink, circle I fill, his enemies, his rising, he seeks, the man. With the Lord of thy beauty thou shalt be faithful. To do evil thou shalt not approach him. At thy illness, to him, at thy distress. The obverse of this tablet is a fragment of the address from the deity to the newly created man on his duties to his God. And it is curious that while in the other parts of the story various gods are mentioned by name, here only one God is mentioned, and simply as the God. The fragments of this tablet might belong to the purist system of religion, but it would in this case be wrong to ground an argument on a single fragment. The reverse of the tablet appears, so far as the sense can be ascertained, to be addressed to the woman, the companion of the man, informing her of her duties towards her partner. The next fragment is a small one. It is the lower corner of the tablet, or of a tablet, with the ends of a few lines. It may possibly belong to the tablet of the fall to be mentioned later. This fragment is of importance, small as it is, because it mentions a speech of Ea to man, and alludes to the Karkar Tiamat, or dragon of the sea, in connection with a revolt against the deity. The fragment is, however, too mutilated to give more than a general idea of its contents. Obverse. Seat, her, all the lords, he might, the gods, Lord, lofty, kingdom exalted, in multitudes increase. Reverse. Ea called to his man, height of his greatness, the rule of any god, Sartukul, or Sartolko, knew it, his noble, his fear, Sartolku, his might, to them the dragon of the sea, against thy father fight. Connected with this fragment is the account of the curse after the fall, of the remarkable fragment which I brought over from my first expedition to Assyria. This forms about half a tablet, being part of the obverse and reverse, both in fair preservation, and so far as they go, fairly perfect, but containing at present many obscurities in the speeches of the gods. Before the commencement of lines 1, 5, 11, 19, 27, and 29 on the obverse, there are glosses stating that the divine titles commencing these lines all apply to the same deity. These explanatory glosses show that even in the Assyrian time, there were difficulties in the narrative. Obverse, the god Z, which had fixed their account, may not fail in preparing. The god Ziku, in parentheses says noble life, quickly called, director of purity, good kinsman, master of perception and right, causer to be faithful and abundant, establisher of fertility. Another to us has come up and greatly increased in thy powerful advance spread over him good. May he speak, may he glorify, may he exalt his majesty. The god Mirku, in parentheses says noble crown, in concern raised a protection, Lord of noble lips, Savior from death, of gods imprisoned, the accomplisher of restoration. His pleasure he established, he fixed upon the gods, his enemies, to fear them he made man. The breath of life was in him. May he be established, and may his will not fail in the mouth of the dark races which his hand has made. The God of noble lips, with his 5 fingers, sin may he cut off. Who with his noble charms removes the evil curse. The god Libzu, wise among the gods, who had chosen his possession. The doing of evil shall not come out of him. Established in the company of the gods, he rejoices their heart. Subduer of the unbeliever, director of right, of corruption, and the god Nisi, keeper of watch, the god Shuhab, swiftly, the power out to them, in like, reverse, the star. May he take the tail and head, because the dragon Tiamat had his punishment, the planets possessing, by the stars of heavens themselves may they, like a sheep, may the god tremble, all of them. May he bind Tiamat her prisons, may he shut up and surround. Afterwards the people of remote ages, may she remove, not destroy, forever. To the place he created he made strong, Lord of the earth his name called out, the Father Elu. In the ranks of the angels pronounced their curse. The god Ea heard, and his liver was angry, because his man had corrupted his purity. He like me, also Ea, may he punish him. The course of my issue, all of them may he remove, and all of my seed may he destroy. In the language of the 50 great gods, by his 50 names he called, and turned away anger from him. Well, geez, this translation says, in the language of the 50 great gods. You know how the religious people are, well, there's only one God, there's only one true God. This one right here, this is one of the most ancient, oldest copies of the Genesis, and here it's saying there's 50 great gods. May he be conquered and at once cut off. Wisdom and knowledge, hostility, or not hostility, hostilely. May they injure him. May they put at enmity also father and son, and may they plunder. To king, ruler, and government may they bend their ear. May they cause anger also to the Lord of the gods, Merodach. His land may it bring forth, but he not touch it. His desire shall be cut off, and his will be unanswered. The opening of his mouth no god shall take notice of. His black or excuse me, not his back. His back shall be broken and not be healed. At his urgent trouble, no God shall receive him. His heart shall be poured out, and his mind shall be troubled. To sin and wrong his face shall come. Front, ... Okay, more mutilated tablets from that point on. In a second copy, which presents several variations, line 14 to 19 are omitted. This valuable fragment is unfortunately obscure in some parts, especially on the obverse, but the general meaning is undoubted, and the approximate position of the fragment in the story is quite clear. It evidently follows the fragment giving the creation of the land, animals, and either forms a further position of the same or part of the following tablet. The obverse gives a series of speeches and statements respecting the newly created man who was supposed to be under the especial care of the deities. It happened in this case that there is no clue for the reason for these speeches, the key portions in the inscription being lost, but a point is evidently made of the purity of the man who is said to be established in the company of the gods and to rejoice their hearts. The various divine titles or names, the God of noble life, the God of noble crown, and the God of noble lips, are all most probably titles of Ea. Ea Enki, the original geneticist. That's who Ea is. The geneticist that actually did the splicing of the DNA. It appears from lines 18 that the race of human being spoken of is the Zalmet Quackadi, or dark race, and in various other fragments of these legends, they are called Adami or Adami, which is exactly the name given to the first man in Genesis. The word Adam used in these legends for the first human being is evidently not a proper name, but is only used as a term for mankind. Adam appears as a proper name in Genesis, but certainly in some passages is only used in the same sense as the Assyrian word, and we are told on the creation of human beings in Genesis verse 1, in the day that God created man, in his likeness of God made he him, male and female, created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam in the day when they were created. It has already been pointed out by Sir Henry Rawlinson that the Babylonians recognized two principal races, the Adamu, or dark race, and the Sarku, or light race, probably in the same manner that two races are mentioned in Genesis, the sons of Adam and the sons of God. It appears, incidentally, from the fragments of inscriptions that it was the race of Adam, or the dark race, which was believed to have fallen. But there is at present no clue to the position of the other race in their system. We are informed in Genesis that when the word became corrupt, or the world became corrupt, the sons of God intermarried with the race of Adam, and thus spread the evils which had commenced with the Adamites. See Genesis chapter 6. The obverse of the tablet giving the creation of man, where it breaks off, leaves him in a state of purity, and where the narrative recommences on the reverse, man has already fallen. Here it is difficult to say how far the narrative of the inscription agrees with that of the Bible. In this case, it is better to review the biblical account, which is complete, and compare it with the fragmentary allusions in the inscriptions. After the statement of man's innocence, which agrees with the inscription, the Bible goes on to relate in Genesis 3 that the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field, and that he tempted the woman to sin. This attribute, the origin of sin, to the serpent, but nothing whatever is said as to the origin or history of the serpent. The fragmentary accounts of the fall in the inscriptions mentions the dragon Tiamat, or the dragon of the sea, evidently in the same relation as the serpent, being concerned in bringing about the fall. Well, yeah, that makes perfect sense. The dragon of the sea, because who's the god of the sea? That's Poseidon, and Poseidon is the brother of Zeus, and Poseidon is the god of the sea, and we know that Enki is Poseidon, and Yahweh is Zeus. So yeah, this all is very congruent with the Anunnaki history. This dragon is called the dragon of Tiamat, or the sea. It is generally conceived of as a griffin and is connected with the original chaos, the Thalith of Berosus, the female principle, which according to both the inscriptions and Berosus, existed before the creation of the universe. This was the original spirit of chaos and disorder, a spirit opposed in principle to the gods and, according to the Babylonians, self-existent and eternal, older even than the gods. For the birth or separation of the deities out of this chaos was the first step in creation of the world. According to the Genesis, the serpent addressed the woman in Genesis 3 and inquired if God had forbidden them to eat of every tree in the Garden of Eden, eliciting from her statement that there was a tree in the middle of the garden, the fruit which was forbidden to them. There is nothing in the present fragments indicating a belief in the Garden of Eden or the Tree of Knowledge. There is only an obscure allusion in lines 16 and 22 to a thirst for knowledge having been a cause of man's fall. Yeah, just like I've been saying. Let's read that again. There is nothing in the present fragments indicating a belief if the Garden of Eden or the Tree of Knowledge. There is only an obscure allusion in lines 16 and 22 to a thirst for knowledge having been the cause of man's fall. See, just man wanting to gain knowledge and wisdom was considered quote-unquote bad because Yahweh, Zeus, obviously wanted to control them and keep them dumbed down. It's just like today, if you go to church and you try to learn anything about like real spirituality, which is like consciousness and the pineal gland and meditating and DMT and ayahuasca and astral projection, they're like, oh, that's demonic, that's witchcraft, that's sinful. It's because they want to keep you stupid. Same shit that's been going on for like thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But outside of these inscriptions, from the general body of the Assyrian text, Sir Henry Rawlinson has pointed out that the agreement of the Babylonian region and the Kardunias, or the Grandunias, with the Eden of the Bible. Eden is a fruitful place, watered by the 4 rivers, Euphrates, Tigris, Gihon, and Pison. And the Gandunias is similar in description, watered by the 4 rivers, Euphrates, Tigris, Serapi, and Ukni. The loss of this portion of the creation legend is unfortunate, as, however probable it may be, the Hebrew and Babylonian traditions agree about the garden and the tree of knowledge. We cannot now prove it. There is a second tree, the tree of life. This is symbolic for immortality, the genetic engineering capabilities of making someone immortal. There is a second tree, the tree of life, in the Genesis account, chapter 3, verse 22, which certainly appears to correspond to the sacred grove of Anu, which a later fragment states was guarded by a sword turning to all the 4 points of the compass. Well, yeah, of course, you had the genetic engineering technology to make someone immortal. Of course, you'd have a freaking army guarding that thing. In several other places in Genesis, legends, and especially in the legends of Izdubar, there are allusions to the tree grove, and forest of the gods. And this divine tree or grove is often represented on the sculptures, both in the Babylonian gem engravings and on the walls of the Assyrian places and temples. Yeah, it sounds like a biolab where they're probably growing all kinds of plants with all crazy healing properties, and they're probably growing psilocybin mushrooms and DMT plants and extracting just all kinds of crazy stuff from these plants and using it for really highly advanced genetic engineering stuff. When the representation is complete, the tree is attended by 2 figures of cherubims, one on each side of the sacred emblem. According to Genesis, Adam and Eve, tempted by the serpent, eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and so by disobedience brought sin into the world. Yeah, brought knowledge and wisdom into the world so that Yahweh would have a more difficult time controlling and enslaving and psychologically manipulating us. That's what the real sin was. Don't get it twisted. These details are also lost in the cuneiform text, which opens again, where the gods are cursing the dragon and the Adam of man for his transgression, corresponding to the passage. So the dragon is Enki. Enki's the serpent. Enki was the one that was the only honest one that wanted to see humanity rise up and reach a higher level of consciousness, and all the other gods didn't like it because they wanted to keep humanity enslaved. Is this making sense? Corresponding to the passage, Genesis 3, 9 to 19, throughout this corresponding passage may be found, which show that the same idea runs through both narratives. But some passages in the cuneiform account are too mutilated to allow any certainty to be attached to the translation, and the loss of the previous parts of the text prevents our knowing what points the allusions are directed to. Although so much of the most important part of the text is lost, the notices in the other parts and the allusions in the mythological scenes on the Babylonian gems will serve to guide us to the probable drift of the missing portion. It is quite clear that the dragon of the sea or the dragon of Tiamat is connected with the fall, like the serpent in the book of Genesis, and in fact is the equivalent of the serpent. The name of the dragon is not written phonetically, but the 2 monograms, which probably mean the scaly one or animal covered with scales. This description, of course, might apply either to a fabulous dragon, a serpent, or a fish. The only passage where there is any phonetic explanation of the signs is in Cuneiform Inscriptions, Volume 2, page 3219, where we have Turbutu for the place of the den of the dragon, perhaps connected with the Hebrew word sea monster. The form of this creature, as given on the gems, is that of a griffin or dragon, generally with a head like a carnivorous animal, body covered with scales, legs terminating in claws like an eagle, and wings on the back. Our own heraldry griffins are so strikingly like the sculptures of this creature that we might almost suspect them to be copies from the Chaldean works. In some cases, however, the early Babylonian seals, which contained devices taken from these legends, more closely approached the Genesis story. One striking and important specimen of early type in the British Museum collection has 2 figures sitting, one on each side of a tree, holding out their hands to the fruit, while at the back of one is stretched a serpent. We know well that in these early sculptures, none of these figures were chance devices, but all represented events or supposed events and figures in their leginas. Thus, it is evident that a form of the story of the fall, similar to that of Genesis, was known in early times in Babylonia. The dragon, which in the Chaldean account of the creation leads man to sin, is the creature of Tiamat, the living principle of the sea and chaos. And he is an embodiment of the spirit of chaos or disorder, which was opposed to the deities at the creation of the world. It is clear that the dragon is included in the curse for the fall, and that the gods invoke on the head of the human race all the evils which afflict humanity. Wisdom and knowledge shall injure him, line 22. He shall have family quarrels, line 23. Shall submit to tyranny, line 24. He will anger the gods, line 25. He shall not eat of the fruit of his labor, line 26. He shall be disappointed in his desires, line 27. He shall pour out useless prayer, line 28. How many years have I been saying that praying does not work? There is nothing in the world that has a higher failure rate than prayer. And right here in the Chaldean account of Genesis, it says in line 28, he shall pour out useless prayer. He shall have trouble of mind and body. That's line 29 and 31. He shall commit future sin. Line 32. Okay, let's go to the next page here. No doubt subsequent lines continue these topics, but again, our narrative is broken, and it only reopens where the gods are preparing for war with the powers of evil, which are led by Tiamat, which war probably arose from the part played by Tiamat in the fall of man. My first idea of this part was that the war with the powers of evil precede the creation. I now think it followed the account of the fall, but I have no direct proof of this. Of the subsequent tablets of the series, which include the war between the gods and the power of evil and the punishment of the dragon Tiamat, there are several fragments. The first of these is K 4832. Too mutilated to translate. It contains speeches of the gods before the war. The second fragment, K 3473, also contains speeches and shows the gods preparing for battle. It is very fragmentary. Okay, we're going to read what the fragments translate to. His mouth opened. His, a word he spoke. Satisfy my anger. Of thee let me send thee. Thou ascendest. Thee to thy presence, their curse. In my circle may they sit. Let them make the vine. Of them they hear the renown. Covered them he set. And thee changed to them. He sent me. He held me. He sinned against me. And angrily. And the gods, all of them, made her hands, and his hand Tiamat coming, destroyed not night and day, burning. They made division, the end of all hands. Formerly thou, great serpents, unyielding eye, their bodies fill, fear shall cover them. And then in parentheses it says several other mutilated lines. The third fragment, K 3938, is on the same subject. Some lines in this give the following general meaning. Great animal, fear made to carry. Their sight was very great. Their bodies were powerful and delightful, strong serpent. Udgalu, Ubat, and days arranged 5, carrying weapons unyielding, her breast, her back, following, and first. Among the gods collected, the god Kingu subdued, marching in front before, carrying weapons thou upon war, his hand appointed. There are many more similar broken lines, and on the other side fragments of the speech by some being who desires Tiamat to make war. All these fragments are not sufficiently complete to translate with certainty or even to ascertain their order. The fourth fragment, K 3449, relates to the making of weapons to arm the god who should meet in war the dragon. This reads, with some doubt, on account of its mutilation. Heart burning from in the temple, may he fix the dwelling of God. The great gods, the God said. The sword that was made, the gods saw. And they saw also the bow which was strung. The work that was made they placed, carried also Anu in the assembly of the gods. The bow he fitted she, and he spake of the bow thus and said, Noble wood, who shall first thus draw thee against? Speed her punishment the star of the bow in heaven, and establish the resting place of, from the choice of, and place his throne in heaven. The next fragment, or collection of fragments, gives the final struggle between Tiamat and Merodach, or Bel. And this fragment appears to distinguish between the dragon of Tiamat, or the sea monster, and Tiamat, the female personification of the sea, but I am not sure of this distinction. The saparu, or sickle-shaped sword, is always represented both in the sculptures and inscriptions as a weapon of Bel in this war. Sixth fragment. He fixed, to his right hand he distributed, and quiver his hand hurled, the lightning he sent before him. Fierceness filled his body. He made the sword to silence the dragon of the sea. The seven winds he fixed not to come out of her wound. On the south, the north, the east, and the west, his hand the sword he caused to hold before the grove of his father, the god Anu. He made the evil wind, the hostile wind, the tempest, the storm, the four winds, the seven winds, the winds of the irregular wind. He brought out the winds, he had created seven of them. The dragon of the sea stretched out came after him. He carried the thunderbolt, his great weapon, in his chariot, unrivaled. Driving he rode. He took her, and four fetters on her hands he fastened. Unyielding, storming. Her with their sting bringing death, sweeping away knowledge, destruction and fighting, left hand, fear. In parentheses, there's several other fragmentary lines. And then it says reverse. The god Sar, dwelling before the weapon, field above, struck the god, them cut into, said to his wife, him to break the god evil, thou shalt be delivered, and thy evil shalt subdue. The tribute to thy maternity shall be forced upon them by thy weapons. I will stand by, and to thee they shall be made a spoil. Tiamat, on hearing this, at once joined the challenge, or not the challenge, at once joined and changed her resolution. Tiamat called and quickly arose. Strongly and firmly she encircled with her defenses. She took a girdle and placed, and the gods for war prepared for them their weapons. Tiamat attacked just the prince of the gods, Merodach. The standards they raised in the conflict like a battle. Bel also drew out his sword and wounded her. The evil wind coming afterwards struck against her face. Tiamat opened her mouth to swallow him. The evil wind he caused to enter before she could shut her lips. The force of the wind her stomach filled, and her heart trembled, and her face was distorted. Violently seized her stomach, her inside it broke, and conquered her heart. He imprisoned her, and her work he ended. Her allies stood over her astonished when Tiamat, their leader, was conquered. Her ranks he broke, her assembly was scattered. And the gods, her helpers, who went beside her, trembled, feared, and broke up themselves. The expiring of her life they fled from, war surrounding they were fleeing, not standing. Them and their weapons he broke, like a sword cast down sitting in darkness, knowing their capture, full of grief, their strength removed, shut in bounds, and at once the strength of their work was overcome with terror. The throwing of stones going, he cast down the enemy, his hand, part of the enemy under him, the god Kingu again, and the main difficulty arises from the fragmentary state of the documents, it being impossible even to decide the order of the fragments. It appears, however, that the gods have fashioned for them a sword and a bow to fight the dragon Tiamat, and Anu proclaims great honor, in the 4th tablet, lines 15 to 20, to any of the gods who will engage in battle with her. Bel and Merodach volunteers, and goes forth armed with these weapons to fight the dragon. Tiamat is encouraged by one of the gods, who has become her husband, and meets Merodach in battle. The depiction of the fight and the subsequent triumph of the god are very fine and remarkably curious in their details, but the connection between the fragments is so uncertain at present that it is better to reserve comment upon them until the text is more complete. This war between the power of good and evil, chaos and order, is extra to the creation. It does not correspond with anything in the Genesis, but rather finds its parallel in the war between Michael and the dragon in Revelation 12, verse 7 through 9, where the dragon is called the great dragon, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. And that's in quotation marks, quoting Revelation. This description is strikingly like the impression gathered from the fragments of the cuneiform story, the dragon Tiamat who fought against the gods and led man to sin, and whose fate it was to be conquered in a celestial war, closely corresponds in all essential points to the dragon conquered by Michael. These fragments of the cuneiform account of the creation and fall agree so far as they are preserved with the biblical account, and show that in the period from BC 2000 to 1500, the Babylonians believe in a similar story to that in Genesis. Okay, that is the end of chapter 5. We'll do chapter 6 in another upload.